Hey there, welcome back. So, over the last little while, I've been thinking to myself with vaccines around the corner, I'm hoping our communities can get together again and return to some form of normality. With that in mind, I wanted something exciting and fun to get my friends back into the hobby. What I had ended up coming up with is this sketch. This is what eventually became a large 4x4 scenic gaming table that I designed for Gaslands and other skirmish war games that my friends and I play together. During this video, I'm hoping to show you the steps and processes I use to make this and hopefully get yourself motivated to make some terrain, make a table, get something to have your friends excited back into the hobby once you're able to play.
Okay, let's get going here. So I've already off camera cut out a bunch of pieces of foam that should bulk out and make up the primary shape and density of our terrain here, and drawn up our schematic onto the primary board pieces. Off of camera, I also decided that I wanted all of the outer walls to be 2 inches high to give a nice variance between the lower central terrain and the hills on the outside, which I thought would make a fun racetrack for Gaslands. So to put all of these in place, I am using a adhesive caulking. There's lots of things you could use here. I don't even necessarily suggest using caulking. It's just what I had at the time. So that's what I end up using. So once that's done, I get these all down and cut out some of the shaping just to smooth it all off before we start the next step. What we're doing now is I have mixed up some plaster with some fibers in it. This plaster is a mix of just basic plaster of Paris as well as some fibrous materials. You can find this in stores as Sculptamold or make it yourself with various things. I believe this batch I mixed up with some blended toilet paper that I put in a blender and just pureed it a whole bunch and then mixed with water and plaster. And that just bulks out some of the form so you don't have to use as much plaster. It'll keep it shape a bit nicer and reduce the weight of what we're doing. And with that plaster, we just start gooping it everywhere. It doesn't need to look particularly nice. If you want to smooth it out, you can. But the point of this is just to make it slightly nicer shaped for our future steps. So you want to be putting that basically anywhere that you want to smooth out the terrain to make a transition. On your ramps, your hills, anything like that that you will eventually want to look smooth rather than a sharp angle. After that, I've gone ahead and poured some plaster into rock molds. You can make these yourself, or there's various companies around that will make rock molds. You just pour plaster in them and pop them out, and they end up looking fairly nice. Once those are on, I've mixed up a batch of Mod Podge and black acrylic paint. I'm just going to seal in the whole board at this point. It adds a certain step of hardening and make sure none of that plaster gets scuffed. A thing you will notice throughout the making of this board is I go very overboard with all of my sealing and hardening. After that is down, I have covered the whole thing in aquarium rocks just to give us some texture. Unfortunately, I have misplaced that footage, but all this is aquarium rocks glued down right on top of that Mod Podge black, and then I just seal that all in again with another coat of Mod Podge. As I had mentioned, a lot of this is redundant. If you don't want to do these steps, you can pretty much get away with after the plaster, skip all the way to the ground cover, because we're going to be putting tile grout on top of all of this to add texture, and tile grout functions essentially like a cement. So this is it once it's all dried and sealed. So once everything's dried again, I've went ahead and printed some bridges and ramps on my filament 3D printer. You could make these by hand. I printed them to save some time and to make them sturdy since they print as a solid plastic. Apparently at this point I also forgot to turn autofocus off on my phone, and so the footage is a bit wonky. I'm sorry about that. So what we've done with these is we're just going to set them down and we're going to plaster them into place using that same compound from earlier, the plaster and fiber mixture. This is just so all of your ramps, your bridges, anything you want to have as an additional structure permanently on the board is going to look like it's a part of the board rather than an object on top of your terrain. Everything is going to be covered up with the tile grout later, so you don't have to worry about it being too rough or anything like that. Once it starts to dry though, if you want to go back over it, well, it's not quite hardened, but more malleable, you can get out some of those spikes. Now, once this is all hardened again and you come back for a third time, I am covering the whole board in a mixture of Mod Podge and paint. So I go through this process, this time mixed with brown paint, and just slather it everywhere. The main point of this is to reseal in all of the new plaster you've put down, but you can go over everything. It's just another layer of hardening. Now here's the part that starts to make your table look better and more realistic. You want to cover the whole board in more glue and start shaking out tile grout on top of it. This will make a very realistic ground texture for your entire board. Once that is down, you want to spray it very thoroughly with isopropyl alcohol and then watered down matte Mod Podge to just seal everything in. And this is what you end up with after one coat of brown. Afterwards, I started laying out more tile grout of another lighter shade of brown to show where the roadway is going to go, since this is a board primarily designed to use with Gaslands. All I have done here is gone around the whole board with this lighter tile grout, shaking it out, making a roadway to show where the cars have been. Once you have that all down, just to clear up and make it look a bit nicer, you can go over it with a brush. I've used a very soft makeup brush here just to be a bit nicer on the board. You can stipple it, you can drag it, and this doesn't matter too much what your texture is like yet, because we're still adding more on top of this. So once you have that all flattened a bit, come back through with an even lighter tile grout and put that sporadically into your roadway. This will just give some nice color variation to your road. You don't want to be too heavy-handed with this. You're going to be blending this into the main color just to give some variance. With that all down, again, we just start brushing it a bit, putting it nicely into the other color. You don't want to mix it too much. You don't want to undermix it. It's something you mostly just feel as you go. You don't want to hide all of that lighter color, but you don't want to have it be super prominent. With that done, we start gluing down some of our flocking. I personally am going with a very vibrant green that I am very sparsely putting down. And then on top of that, much heavier, a brown green, just to make the area look more like fall, more slightly dead. I didn't want it to be like some kind of plains. I wanted it to be more of a wasteland, but still have some green to it. While we're doing this, I should mention, if you look at the track at this point, you can see all sorts of tire tracks on it. If you are building a Gaslands track, if you want a bit of extra texture in your board, take some of your cars that you don't have the wheels glued down on and just play with some toy cars, drive it all over the roadway, and that tile grout will keep that texture and lock it in once you've wet it and sealed it. And it's just a nice way of putting some added detail into a board that if you want it to fit into this setting, you can go ahead and do. That takes basically no extra time. So I keep working on this late into the night until I finally get the whole board flocked, and I just, again, you soak everything, the tile grout, the grass, you soak it all in a mixture of watered down isopropyl and then glue. And this is what you get once it's dry in the morning. Now if you wanted to, you could go back in, keep adding detail, but I was happy enough to call it finished. So hopefully this has inspired you to maybe use some of these techniques and get out there and make your own board, your own terrain. This stuff is not as hard as it looks, I promise you. And it's really fun and satisfying once you have something. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It helps me know people are enjoying the content that I am making. In the future, I'm trying to release videos every 2 weeks, and I have more Gaslands stuff coming up soon. I hope you have a good evening and get to making some fun stuff for your own group. Bye for now.